General Hospital spoilers reveal that Michael's return is not just a turning point in his personal life, but also marks a pivotal moment that is shaking the fragile order in Port Charles. When Michael reappears, carrying himself with maturity, a heavy silence, and a dark look filled with both disappointment and determination, everything around Willow starts to shift. No more unanswered calls, no more half-hearted explanations from Drew, and most importantly, no more voids in her soul that Willow once tried to fill with the gentleness of a man who was not her husband. The moment Michael stands before her, without saying a word, his eyes make everything, doubts, hurts, and deceptions, crystal clear in a way that has never been so obvious. Willow had never stopped loving Michael. But she forced herself to forget him in order to survive, to keep living, and to raise their child in a world without him, where she believed Michael had turned his back on her. But now, his return shatters all the protective walls she built. Between them now is not just unfinished love, but 2 children, broken memories, manipulated interests, and secrets that have never been spoken. And what's even more frightening is that the moment Michael steps back into town, a series of troubles that had been simmering in the dark suddenly rise like a tidal wave, swallowing every pretense of peace. Their reunion is no longer just an emotional encounter, but the beginning of a series of conflicts revolving around legal rights, child custody, and assets tied to the Corinthos Quartermain family name. Willow signed papers with the belief that Michael was no longer a part of their lives, while Drew, under the guise of a surrogate father, quietly took what didn't belong to him. But now, Michael has returned, and he didn't come back to apologize or beg for forgiveness. He returned to claim everything that was taken from him. From his right to fatherhood to the truth about why he was systematically excluded from his family's life. Willow, standing between 2 fires, begins to feel overwhelmed by the truth. When she learns that Michael never rejected her, never ignored any of her calls, and never received any messages from her while he was in Germany. And that Drew was the one behind the entire separation, someone she had trusted completely, everything within her crumbles. She doesn't just lose faith in one person. She feels betrayed by the entire world that once surrounded her. And in that collapse, the only person who makes her feel stable, is the one who had disappeared. Willow is no longer the girl who has to choose between 2 men, she is the mother, the woman who must now enter into a legal, moral, and emotional battle to secure the future for herself and her children. Michael, after everything, understands every legal twist he's facing. The legal troubles over Amelia's custody, the overlapping temporary decisions made by Willow, and the transfer of asset rights while he was absent, are all creating a dangerous maze where one wrong step could cost him everything. But this time, Michael is no longer the man who acts on impulse. He's had time to reflect, to prepare, and to reconnect with his true allies, those willing to help him expose the truth. Even if it means dragging Drew and those behind him into a brutal legal and media whirlwind. At the center of this storm is Willow, the woman once torn between love and truth. Now having to ask herself, does she have the courage to trust the man who once hurt her so deeply that she almost gave up all hope? Does she have the strength to face herself? To face the truth that her love for him never faded, it was just suppressed by lies and manipulation? Michael and Willow's return is not a sweet, romantic chapter, but a declaration of war against all those who thought they could control others' destinies through power, law, and sophisticated lies. And when they stand together again, not naive, not vulnerable, they will be a force to tear down the artificial boundaries that Port Charles once thought could never be broken. This is not just a return, it's the beginning of a new alliance. Of a broken couple now ready to fight to reclaim everything. Willow is gradually being pushed into a no-way-out situation, where every choice leads to loss. And every decision carries irreversible consequences. As the legal battle over Wiley and Amelia's custody begins to unfold, no longer secured by peaceful past agreements, Willow realizes she cannot continue standing alone. Michael's return is not just a personal event, it's a crucial link that forces her to reassess the entire order she once believed to be safe. And now, in order to protect her children, she must reconnect with the man she once believed had abandoned her, Michael, her ex-husband, Wiley's biological father. And the only one powerful enough to join her in the legal battle for custody that is about to explode. Reconnecting with Michael is not just an emotional act, it's a political move. A necessary step in a game that's being flipped upside down by conflicting interests and the ever-growing interference of other parties. Willow is forced to sit down with Michael. Not to relive memories, but to build a legal case together, a strategy to protect the children from being dragged into the endless power struggle between Drew, Carly, and even Nina. But as Willow tries to bring Michael back as an ally, another pressure begins to weigh on her shoulders, compromising with Drew. Drew, who once provided emotional support, now suddenly becomes a silent threat. He is no longer the warm, patient man he once was. After the fractures, the secrets exposed, and the truth about him blocking Willow from seeing Michael in Germany, Drew starts showing another side, more controlling, colder, and willing to use any legal tool to maintain his influence over Amelia. Willow, aware of this, understands that she cannot fight Drew with emotions. She has to negotiate. She has to compromise, a thing she promised herself she would never do when it came to her children. This compromise opens up a new, maddening chapter in Willow's life. She's caught between two men who once held different chapters of her heart, and now both are fighting for the right to dictate the future of her children. To keep Wiley and Amelia by her side, Willow must act like a politician, not just a mother. She must sign agreements with no names attached, nod to demands she bitterly hates, just to maintain some stability for the children. But the more she compromises with Drew, the more she feels she's losing herself. Losing the ideals that led her to distance herself from Michael and start over. Willow can no longer hide the rising obsession in her heart. The obsession with Michael's change, who now returns with a terrifying silence, no longer begging, no longer sorrowful, but full of calculation and control. The obsession with Drew's gaze, a gaze that once encouraged her, now a quiet threat. The obsession with lawyer meetings, closed-door family sessions, and paperwork full of terms that make her feel like a stranger to her own maternal authority. Every day that passes, Willow sinks deeper into the legal and emotional quicksand, where everyone claims to want what's best for the child, but their definitions of that are far from the same. And while she tries to balance between Michael and Drew, one undeniable truth is becoming clearer by the day: Willow is changing. She is no longer the woman who just accepts, no longer the one who smiles through her pain. She is becoming a warrior, not for herself, but for her children. And in that change, she is slowly approaching the boundary between love and control, between protection and manipulation. Port Charles will soon witness a different Willow, more determined, more dangerous, and willing to do things she once condemned, just to not lose her children again. Everything is changing. Not just in the law, but in the very nature of relationships. And if Michael is the storm that has returned, then Willow is the simmering earthquake, and when she starts shaking, no one, not even Drew, will be able to stop the fallout. Michael has returned to Port Charles not merely as a man returning from the past, but as a force preparing to restore the values that were once stolen from him, from his family, and from his very life. And this time, he has not come back alone. The quiet yet powerful presence of Jason beside him signals more clearly than anything else that a real battle is about to begin, not a vengeful emotional outburst, but a carefully calculated campaign where the truth will no longer be hidden, where power will be challenged, and where all the manipulations will be exposed before justice and the light. After a long period of silence, Jason has quietly stayed in the background, gathering the necessary information, connecting the pieces that no one else could. Both he and Michael know that in order to reclaim what is rightfully theirs, they can no longer fight with emotion, they must fight with evidence, with strategy, and with an unwavering commitment to not compromise. And the first, clear, and specific target is Drew, once an ally, once family, but now the center of a web of poor decisions and covert manipulations that are slowly destroying the lives of innocent people. Willow, caught in the precise movements of Michael and Jason, begins to feel the ground beneath her feet shaking. At first, she couldn't accept that Drew, who had held her when she cried over Michael's disappearance, could be the one who had quietly built all the barriers to prevent her from finding her husband. But the signs became clearer each day. Willow saw the heavy control in Drew's soft words. The cold calculation in the way he arranged meetings with lawyers, the way he actively created situations that made her feel weak, making her believe that he was the only one who could help her keep her family intact. And when Michael began to share the truth, piece by piece, Willow woke up from a long, tear-filled dream. She realized she had been led astray, her emotions manipulated, isolated from fair choices in her own life story. She had once believed that Michael had intentionally stayed away. But now she understood, he was never allowed to return. Every letter, every phone call, every effort to reach out had been cut off at its roots, by someone she had once considered her savior. In that moment, love not only returned to her heart, but anger also surged. Willow, who had once stepped back to protect her children from harm, now emerged from the shadows with a sharpness and clarity that she never thought she possessed. She began to silently cooperate with Michael and Jason, quietly gathering evidence. Recording Drew's ambiguous words, his excessive actions towards Amelia, and his unusual maneuvers to change guardianship without her true consent. Willow was no longer just a mother, she became a living witness to the truth, the key to unlocking the secrets that Drew had carefully concealed behind his perfect mask all this time. At the same time, Drew began to sense the shift. He could see in Willow's eyes that something had changed. He realized she was pulling away. Even though on the surface she still maintained a demeanor of kindness. And that caused Drew to panic. He started tightening his control, issuing veiled threats about the consequences if Willow returned to Michael, if she continued to involve Jason in the family circle. His anxiety was now visible. Deep down, he knew that once Michael and Jason took action, everything he had built on lies would crumble. The official battle began when Michael and Jason filed a lawsuit to reclaim guardianship, attaching documents that showed Drew had illegally interfered with Willow's decision-making rights. Along with evidence of unusual cash payments to a middleman in Baden-Baden, a person hired to prevent Michael from contacting Willow while she was undergoing treatment in Germany. Soon after, local media began reporting on a lawsuit involving fraud in guardianship and abuse of influence in the care of minors, and Drew's name appeared not only in the headlines but in every discussion around town. Willow, now no longer afraid, stood in court as a manipulated mother, as a woman who had been stripped of her right to choose, and as the one who would ultimately decide whether her children would grow up in the truth. And in the seat next to her, Michael sat, no longer the misunderstood husband, but a father ready to fight to the end. Jason stood behind them, no need for the spotlight, no need for recognition, but the unshakable pillar. Port Charles had never witnessed such a powerful reshaping of power. No longer could anyone hide behind the guise of protection. No longer could anyone mask their true motives behind moral smiles. Everything had changed, and it was Willow's awakening, Michael's return, and Jason's quiet but steadfast protection that were creating a new, explosive characteristic. The complete collapse of those who believed they could control the truth with their hands. But the truth, as it always does, found its voice, and this time, it would no longer remain silent. Willow was slowly feeling herself being cornered into a dead end, where every action, every decision of hers was controlled by overwhelming, unseen forces, at the forefront of which stood Drew. Once a source of emotional support after Michael's disappearance, Drew had now become the embodiment of a shadowy force, surrounding Willow's life with rules, conditions, and cold compromises that no longer carried the warmth of love. Willow no longer had the luxury of choice as a mother, an ex-wife, or as an individual with autonomy. She was being forced to follow a script written by Drew, where every word and action was being monitored, twisted to serve a fake power structure he had built under the guise of protecting the family. It was in that suffocating environment that Willow began to awaken. And this awakening did not come from pain or confusion, but from the fact that Michael had returned, carrying with him a gaze that was no longer desperate but determined. Bringing with him the quiet yet firm support from Jason, and above all, carrying the truth that had been stripped away from her. She realized that Michael's disappearance had not been abandonment, but the result of a series of calculated actions designed to isolate them from one another, to make her believe that Michael had left, when in fact it had been Drew who manipulated the information, the emotions, and the circumstances. And as these facts became clearer with each piece of evidence Michael presented, each puzzle Jason silently connected, Willow could no longer turn a blind eye. She knew that in order to reclaim her life, to protect her children, and to rebuild the trust that had been distorted, she had to act, no longer with gentleness, but with determination. And that meant standing with Michael, not just as an ex-wife, but as a true ally in the fight to reclaim the right to parenthood, the right to control her own destiny. For the first time in a long while, Willow dared to place her trust in Michael once again, because only he had the reason not to betray her. Because only he truly understood how heavy that loss had been. The battle was not loud, but it began with a shift in power from Drew's hands back to Michael's. Lawsuits began to be filed. Previously concealed information began to surface at the lawyer's table, and manipulated reports were being overturned, piece by piece. And each time Michael moved one step closer to the truth. Drew tightened his grip around Willow, with veiled threats, with warning glances, with ultimatums about the consequences, if she chose the wrong side. But what Drew didn't know was that his oppression had become the very catalyst for Willow to break free. She no longer wanted to live under a false cloak of protection. No longer wanted her children to grow up in a world where love was defined by control. Willow began to stand up, every testimony, every meeting with lawyers, every confrontation with Drew. She was no longer the woman timid with fear. She knew she was burning her bridges, but she would rather face the truth than continue living in a pretty but rotting shell. She and Michael began to plan. To reconstruct the entire sequence of events from the moment he was cut off in Germany to when Drew unilaterally made decisions about guardianship and legal directions without her true consent. And when the confrontation became inevitable, Willow did not hesitate. Drew, despite maintaining his calm, began to see the cracks in his strategy. Allies started to distance themselves from him. Those who had once stood by him now silently observed. The threats no longer worked on Willow. The compromises no longer made her step back. Because in this battle, she had rediscovered who she truly was, no longer a woman living to please others, but a mother ready to tear apart any fake system to reclaim what was truly hers. The story of Willow, Michael, and Drew was no longer just a triangle full of contradictions. It was a testament to one of the most profound transformations in Port Charles, where a woman once cornered, once stripped of her voice and choice, was now rewriting all the rules of the game with the man who had been pushed out of the picture. And this time, those who were accustomed to suppressing, manipulating, and controlling would have nowhere to hide. Willow no longer needed permission to fight. She had awakened. And she would lead the way in a revolution named freedom, truth, and love unconditioned. Willow will still be the mother of Wiley and Amelia, not just in a legal sense, but in the deepest essence of motherhood. What she has endured. From life and death moments to months of battling illness, isolation, and betrayal, has forged an unwavering strength that nothing can shake. Willow doesn't need anyone to acknowledge or permit her to be a mother, because every moment spent with her children is the clearest proof of her love and sacrifice. However, when Michael returns, not only bringing the truth that had been twisted, but also a meticulously prepared strategy to reclaim what was once taken from him, Willow is forced to realize that her motherhood will no longer exist if she continues to stand still amidst a rapidly shifting battlefield. Michael is no longer the man pushed out of Willow's life. He is no longer the heartbroken ex-husband, silently watching from a distance. Now, he is a father who has awakened after a series of days when his paternal rights were stripped away. A man who understands that if he doesn't act, not only Amelia and Wiley, but even Willow will be drowned in a finely crafted system of control built by Drew. The new adjustments Michael begins to make are not just legal strategies or discreet negotiations. They are a public declaration of war against everything that once left him powerless. From Drew's interference with the information between him and Willow, to his manipulation of legal decisions to temporarily seize control of the family. At first, Willow couldn't believe things had become so serious. She thought Drew was just trying to protect her in his own way, but the more she saw, heard, and felt, the more a completely different picture emerged. Drew was no longer a companion. He was the overseer, the one setting the limits. The one speaking of sacrifice as if it were the price she had to pay for her children to have a stable home. Willow realized that every step she took, every decision she made, had been silently guided. And when Michael began to lay out each link in that system, from the blocked communication to the distorted legal documents, Willow understood that her freedom had been nothing but an illusion. Michael was not alone in this fight. Jason, the silent brother, stepped in like a familiar shadow, quiet, unassuming, but bringing with him an undeniable sense of stability and strength. Jason was someone who didn't need to say much. His mere presence was enough to make Drew's plans start to tremble. Together, Michael and Jason built a new front, a counterattack not with violence, but with truth, with paperwork, with witnesses, and with Willow's trust, which was restored bit by bit. They weren't there to break, but to rebuild, a family, a foundation, and a new future. The deeper Willow got into the plan with Michael, the clearer the impending explosion became. Drew began to lose control, no longer able to maintain the calm facade he once had. He became tense. Angry, dragging Carly into tense arguments, trying to tighten the remaining relationships to protect his crumbling power. But this only backfired. Carly had lost her patience. And those who had once sided with Drew began to step away. Everything became chaotic, and in that chaos, Willow found the rare clarity. She knew she had to make a choice, not just for herself, but for Wiley and Amelia. She could not let her children grow up in an environment where control was disguised as love, where the truth was twisted to serve so-called stability. Willow chose to stand with Michael, not out of debt or nostalgia, but out of clarity. She knew he wasn't perfect, but she trusted that Michael would never use their children as pawns. And that was the only thing that made her feel safe in a world that was crumbling around her. This battle was no longer just an internal matter. Port Charles began to whisper, the media got involved, and lawyers fought for the hearing. Drew was trying to hold on to everything, but the harder he gripped, the more everything slipped away. Michael, with his cold composure, began to reclaim everything. Piece by piece, from the image in the public's eye to his voice in hearings, and most importantly, Willow's trust. Willow remained the mother of Wiley and Amelia, but not in the old way. Now, she was the central figure in a complete transformation, from the family model to legal power, and even the concept of sacrifice. She no longer bowed her head, no longer yielded, no longer accepted any adjustments from anyone other than herself. And it was she, not anyone else, who would decide the future of her children. While Michael continued to expand the front, she would be the one to hold the heart of the family. And when all the dust settled, when the oppressors were brought to light, Port Charles would never be the same again, because of a mother who dared to stand up, and a father who returned at the right moment, together rebuilding from the ashes.